Welcome back, biologists. So we have talked about how plants are absorbing minerals and water. We've talked about the xylem. We've talked about apoplastic and symplastic root. Now let's put it all together to get those minerals and water to the different parts of the plant. So the plant's root has root hairs on it, and through that root hair, that will absorb water and minerals from the soil. Those water and minerals will get into the root cortex, and then eventually they're going to pass to the vascular cylinder where the xylem and phloem are found. To get into the vascular cylinder, the water is going to have to pass through the endodermis. It's going to act as a checkpoint that helps make sure that any toxins or unneeded materials don't get into the vascular cortex. So the water that's going through the symplastic root got checked. It had to be permeable through the cell membrane to get into the symplastic root. So through that symplastic root, it can just go straight through the plasma membrane, through those junctions into the vascular cylinder. But water and minerals going through the apoplastic root, when they get to the endodermis, it'll hit the Casparian strip. And the Casparian strip is a waxy layer that's embedded in these endodermal cells and stops the apoplastic root from going through the endodermis. So at that point, the apoplastic root, all those materials are having to go into the symplastic root to get through the endodermis, where they're checked to make sure that they are appropriate to come into the endodermis and then into the vascular cylinder. That also makes sure, this Casparian strip, that once materials reach the vascular cylinder, they won't just diffuse back out. So it also allows the plant to accumulate those minerals in higher concentrations within the vascular cylinder than it has outside of the plant. Once the materials get to the vascular cylinder, they can get into the xylem either through active transport or through passive diffusion. And then in the xylem, they will enter the vessel elements and the tracheids, and they'll be able to bulk flow up to the shoots.
Now let's look at how water and minerals enter through the roots. Roots are highly branched, creating a lot of area for absorption. Root hairs near each root tip increase the surface area. Water and minerals, shown in yellow, can follow two paths from cell to cell within a root. In one path, they travel in the cytoplasm, which is connected between cells. In the other path, they travel within cell walls. In the path within cell walls, however, they encounter a waxy barrier that blocks entry to the xylem. To continue, the water and minerals must cross a plasma membrane. In this way, only certain minerals can enter the xylem.
Once the water and minerals get into the xylem, they're called xylem sap, and water in bulk flow is hauling. It can move 15 miles per hour up to 45 miles per hour. And there's two different possible ways that water could be moving here. One is that the roots could be pushing the water up, and one is that leaves and other above ground portions could be pulling the water up. So let's talk about those two different ways that xylem could be transporting water. So at nighttime, the root cells will lower their water potential. They'll actively pump mineral ions into the xylem. So water will flow in from the root cortex, and that will allow those roots to generate root pressure and push xylem up. That's why sometimes in the mornings, it can cause something called guttation, or excess water will appear as droplets on the edges of leaves. This is not the same thing as dew. Dew can also be water on leaves, but guttation is where that plant from root pressure has pushed up the water until water has actually exuded from the plant. However, root pressure is pretty weak, and it's a minor mechanism of xylem bulk flow, which isn't really surprising. If you've ever had a cut flower and put it in water, it doesn't have roots anymore, but it's still able to have water be pulled up the plant. So water is also pulled up through negative pressure by the xylem in what's called transpirational pull. So in the leaf, at the surface of the leaf, there's a lot more water vapor within the leaf than there is in the environment. So that water vapor will evaporate and exit the leaf through stomata. And then that's called transpiration. That produces a negative pressure in the leaf, which pulls water up the xylem and pulls water into the leaf. This is going through a couple of different things that are happening here. One is that you have cohesion of water to the surfaces, to the cell walls, and one is the adhesion of water to other water. And so as the water starts evaporating, that water will make contact with other water molecules and just pull it on up the plant. The transpirational pull on the xylem sap will go all the way from the leaves all the way to the root tips. It can even go into the soil solution and pull water into the roots. And that's because of the cohesion and adhesion of water to other water molecules or adhesion to the cell walls. Let's watch a little video about transpiration.
Trees must transport water and minerals to their highest leaves. How does this happen? Interestingly, trees move water by losing water. Evaporation of water from plants is called transpiration. Water diffuses from inside a leaf to the outside air through pores. Inside a leaf are air spaces. Water evaporates constantly from the surfaces of surrounding cells. To better see the water, let's show it in blue. Notice that water forms a film on cell walls, including the walls of cells in leaf veins. Within the veins are hollow, tube-like cells, shown in brown. These cells, also found in stems and roots, are part of a tissue called xylem. Water and minerals are transported from roots to veins through the xylem, and then from veins into the walls of other leaf cells.
So one thing that I think is interesting about transpiration is that because it is relying on cohesion of water molecules to each other, if you end up with a bubble of air in the middle of it, it'll break that cohesion and could actually affect how much your water is being pulled up. So that's one reason why, if you are cutting flowers and putting them in a vase, you want to try to minimize how much air is getting into the stem of your plant. And another thing that's interesting is because this is a pulling of water up, it's similar to like sucking on a straw. When you suck on a straw, it kind of pulls in the straw, narrows that straw. You can actually measure on a tree, like if you measured the circumference around its if you measure the circumference around its trunk, you can actually see that shrinks. Its circumference actually is pulled in a little bit as that water is pulled up. All right, so at this point, one more thing. So because your plant cells have really strong cell walls, though, they're able to survive that pull. Okay, so at this point, you can answer these questions. Our third concept check of this chapter. A horticulturalist noticed that when zinnia flowers, these are zinnia in this picture, when they're cut at dawn, a small drop of water collects on the rooted stump. So not on the flowers, but on the stump that's left there in the ground with the root. A few drops of water collect there. However, when the flowers are cut at noon, no drop is observed. Suggest an explanation for this. Secondly, an Arabidopsis, that's this flower here, a mutant Arabidopsis that lacks functional aquaporin proteins has a root mass that's 3 times greater than that of wild-type plants. It's just an explanation for that. And then compare the Casparian strip and tight junctions. All right, I'll see you for our next video. We'll finish up this chapter. We'll talk about stomata and how those are impacting everything. See you later. Bye.